The Boy with the Silent Eyes. Mia had been working the late shift at Ridgeway Diner for 2 years, but she had never seen a night as unsettling as this one. It was nearly midnight, rain pushing against the windows like impatient fingers, the neon "open" sign flickering weakly as though it was tired of keeping the building alive. She was wiping down the counter, thinking about her overdue rent and the cheap instant noodles waiting for her at home, when she noticed the glass of water sitting on booth 5. The rest of the booth was empty. She frowned. She hadn't served anyone there. She hadn't heard the door chime, and Sam, the cook, hadn't stepped out of the kitchen since 10. Before she could think too deeply about it, lightning flashed outside, lighting up the diner like a camera flash, and for a split second she saw him sitting there. A small boy, no older than 6, wearing a gray hoodie too big for his slim shoulders. His head was bowed, his hands resting calmly on the table, and he didn't even flinch at the thunder. Mia blinked hard, trying to understand how she had missed the sound of the door, but something deeper inside her told her not to worry about that. Instead, she felt an unexpected pull toward the boy, a sense of responsibility she couldn't explain. She approached carefully, trying not to startle him. "Hey, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice warm with the tone she used for frightened customers. "Are you all right? Are your parents here somewhere?" The boy didn't look up. His head stayed down, his breathing soft, almost too soft. For a moment she wondered if he was sleeping, or worse, unconscious. But then she saw something that made her chest tighten. A tear slid down from beneath his dark fringe and hit the table silently. Not a single sound left him. No sniffles, no gasps, just silent tears rolling one by one like he was made of still water being cracked from the inside. Mia slowly slid into the seat across from him, keeping her movements gentle. "It's okay," she whispered. "You don't have to talk, just nod if you're hurt." The boy didn't move, not even a twitch. His stillness was unnatural, like he was trying to disappear into himself. Mia had seen many types of pain. Kids from broken families, lonely teenagers, drunks who confessed their tragedies over cheap coffee. But nothing like this. There was something ancient in his silence, something too heavy for a child. She reached out and placed a napkin in front of him, along with a red crayon she kept in her apron for bored customers' kids. "Here," she said softly. "You don't have to speak. You can draw if you want. It sometimes helps." The boy lifted his face slightly, just enough for Mia to see his eyes. Dark, impossibly dark, so deep they looked more like wells than irises. Her breath caught. Those weren't normal eyes. They were ancient, sorrowful, and aware in a way no child's eyes should be. He looked at her like he wasn't just seeing her, but remembering her. Before she could process the strange familiarity in his gaze, something else caught her attention. On the floor, below his booth. The bright fluorescent lights should have cast shadows from the table, the boy, and the chairs. Her own shadow stretched clearly across the tiles. But the boy had none. The space beneath his legs was perfectly lit, clean, empty. No shadow, not even a faint outline. Mia sat completely still, trying to rationalize it. Maybe it was the angle of the light, or maybe she was overtired, hallucinating after a long shift. She had worked 12 days in a row. She was stressed, exhausted, barely sleeping. But no amount of stress could erase a person's shadow. The boy watched her reaction quietly, as though he already knew what she had just discovered. For the first time, his lips parted, but no sound emerged. He simply pushed the crayon toward her instead of drawing with it. She understood that as a request, so she picked it up and drew a small sun on the napkin. "See," she said gently, "a bright sun for you. Something warm, something happy." His small fingers trembled. Slowly, he reached for the crayon and drew next to hers. A sun too, but his was cracked, broken into sharp pieces, with long streaks reaching out like flames, or hands. Her chest tightened. "Why is it broken?" she whispered. The boy lowered his gaze again, shoulders shaking slightly. Before she could comfort him, the door chimed faintly, so soft she almost didn't hear it, and a sudden chill swept through the diner. The lights flickered once, twice. Mia shivered. The temperature dropped as though winter had walked into the room. She glanced toward the large front window. Through the rain-smeared glass, under the flickering streetlight, she saw a figure standing at the edge of the parking lot. Tall, motionless, wrapped in a long black coat that didn't move with the wind. His face was hidden, but she felt his gaze like a physical force pressing against the glass. Something primal deep inside her whispered that the boy belonged to him. And something even deeper whispered that the man was not human. The boy's small hand suddenly reached across the table and grabbed hers. His fingers were ice cold, his grip desperate. Not afraid of her, but afraid for her. Mia's heart slammed against her ribs. "Is he your father?" she whispered. The boy didn't answer, but the way he squeezed her hand made the truth fall into place like a heavy stone. Outside, the tall figure stepped closer, still hidden by shadow, still impossibly still, observing, waiting, watching her with the silent intensity of a predator evaluating a threat, or a protector acknowledging something important. Mia realized with a trembling breath that she was not just comforting a lost child. She was sitting with the son of something ancient, something powerful, something watching her every move from the darkness. And for reasons she didn't yet understand, he wasn't angry. He was curious about her. Deeply, dangerously curious. The hunters outside the glass, Mia didn't know how long she sat frozen with the boy's icy hand wrapped around hers. But the world outside the diner felt wrong, heavier than the rain-soaked night should allow. The tall figure who watched them didn't move, didn't shift, didn't even blink as far as she could tell, and the longer he stood there, the more Mia felt as though he wasn't just looking at the boy, he was studying her, memorizing her face, judging something she didn't understand. The boy's grip suddenly tightened, and Mia felt the vibration of something like fear rippling through his small frame. Hey, it's okay," she whispered, though it was a lie, and they both knew it. "No one's going to hurt you here." Before she could say anything else, the bell above the diner door jingled weakly, not in the usual cheerful way, but like it had been forced to ring by a breeze that didn't belong in this world. The lights flickered again, dimming to a soft orange glow, and a cold wind swept across the room, even though the door was still closed. At first, Mia thought Sam had stepped out of the kitchen again, but when she turned, he wasn't there. Instead, she saw two men standing outside the glass window, figures she hadn't noticed before because they blended too easily into the rain and darkness. They wore long coats, slick from the storm, and their faces were partially hidden beneath the shadows of their hoods. But there was no mistaking their eyes. Even from inside, even through the glass, she could see a faint reddish glow burning in their gaze. Not bright, not obvious, more like embers inside a dying fire, watching, hunting. They weren't human. Or if they were, something had changed them in ways she didn't want to imagine. The boy trembled harder, his small fingers clawing at her palm. Mia instinctively pulled him closer, shielding him with her body, even though she had no idea what she was protecting him from. The men outside the window stepped closer, their boots splashing silently in puddles, and one of them lifted his hand slowly, pressing his fingers against the glass exactly where the boy sat. That was when the tall man in the parking lot finally moved. Not like a normal person taking steps through water, but like a shadow detaching itself from the night, gliding forward in one seamless motion. His long coat didn't sway, his boots didn't splash, the rain didn't even seem to touch him. The hunters outside the window noticed immediately, their glowing eyes narrowing as they turned toward him. For a moment, Mia felt the air change, thick with tension, like the first second after lightning strikes, but before the thunder hits. Then, in a voice deep enough to vibrate through the glass and through her bones, the tall man spoke a single word. She didn't understand the language, but the word felt old and dangerous, something no human throat should be able to form. The hunters responded. One stepped back. The other stood his ground, his lips curling back in something between fear and defiance. Their eyes glowed brighter now, burning like coals. Mia felt the boy bury his face into her side. "Who are they?" she whispered. But he didn't answer. He didn't need to. The truth was obvious in his trembling. They had come for him. And the man in the parking lot, the one watching them so intently, was the only thing standing between the child and those glowing-eyed creatures. The hunters moved first. The one who had pressed his hand against the glass slammed his palm harder, cracking it like thin ice. Mia gasped and instinctively wrapped her arms around the boy, pulling him fully into her lap. Sam burst out from the kitchen at that moment, holding a ladle like a weapon. "Mia, what the hell is going on out here?" But before he could finish, the tall man outside did something impossible. He raised his hand, not quickly, not dramatically, just a slow, deliberate motion, and the hunters stumbled backward as if shoved by a hurricane blast no one else could feel. The cracked glass shook violently, rattling in its frame, but didn't break further. The hunters snarled, their faces distorting for a brief moment into something inhuman, something feral, before darting away into the darkness with supernatural speed, gone in less than a heartbeat. Sam blinked at the scene, confused, seeing only the cracked window and Mia clutching a child who hadn't been there 10 minutes earlier. "Where did those guys go?" he asked. "What did they do?" Mia couldn't answer. She didn't know how to explain eyes glowing in the dark or men moving faster than sound. Sam moved toward the window, trying to look outside, but Mia grabbed his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." The tall figure outside didn't follow the hunters. Instead, he turned his head toward the diner and locked eyes with Mia through the cracked glass. That stare froze her. It wasn't the cold stare of a predator or the curiosity of a stranger. It was recognition. He recognized her. But how? Mia's heart pounded so loud she felt it echo in her ears. Her skin prickled as if the air was charged with electricity. The boy lifted his head from her chest and looked toward the window too. For the first time, his small voice, soft, fragile, broke the silence. "He's my father." Mia's breath caught. She looked at the tall figure again, and something in her stomach dropped, because the word father didn't fit the cold, ancient aura surrounding the man outside. That was no ordinary parent. And if this child was his son, what is he? She whispered. The boy didn't answer, but the way his fingers clutched her apron told her enough. The man outside was powerful, beyond powerful, and he had watched every moment she had spent with his son. The cracked window flickered with reflected light as a distant car passed on the highway, and in that brief glow, she saw the tall man's eyes flash. Silver, sharp, predatory, too bright to belong to any living human. Then slowly, deliberately, he lifted his hand toward her. Not in threat, in acknowledgement, almost gratitude? Mia couldn't breathe. The boy whispered one more thing, so soft she almost didn't hear it. "He's been searching for you." Before she could ask why, the lights flickered violently, the temperature plummeted again, and the tall figure outside vanished into the darkness like he had never been there at all.
The mark that should not exist. Mia barely slept after what happened at the diner. She drove home with shaking hands, checking her rearview mirror every few seconds, convinced she would see glowing eyes or a tall shadow following her. But the roads were empty, except for the mist curling across the asphalt like pale fingers. By the time she reached her small apartment, her clothes were damp with rain and fear, and she could barely steady her breathing. She set her keys on the counter, splashed cold water on her face, and tried to convince herself that everything she had witnessed had a rational explanation. Maybe the boy was just sick. Maybe the men outside were criminals. Maybe the tall figure wasn't supernatural at all, just someone protecting his child. But every time she thought that, she remembered the boy's lack of a shadow. She remembered the hunter's glowing eyes. She remembered the way the tall man moved like a wind she couldn't feel. She remembered the boy whispering, "He's been searching for you." Why? She didn't know him. She had never met him. She was nobody, a broke waitress living paycheck to paycheck. She wasn't the kind of person powerful beings searched for. She curled up on her couch, trying to stay awake, but exhaustion finally won and she drifted into a restless sleep. It felt like she had barely closed her eyes when a burning pain shot through her wrist. She gasped and jolted awake, clutching her arm. A faint mark glowed on the inside of her wrist, thin lines forming a shape she didn't recognize at first, like an ancient symbol pressed into her skin by invisible fire. The glow faded slowly, leaving behind a pale silver imprint that shimmered in the dim light of her living room. "What is this?" she whispered, terrified. The moment she said the words, a memory flickered at the edge of her mind. Something from years ago, something blurry and distant, like a dream she had forgotten, but her body still remembered. A voice, a child's laugh, a garden, stone walls? But it vanished before she could grasp it. Desperate to calm herself, she opened the small cardboard box hidden at the back of her closet. It held the only belongings she had when she entered foster care at age 11. A faded blanket, a wooden carving of a bird, and a small sketchbook filled with childish drawings. She flipped through the pages quickly, hoping for a distraction. Cats, houses, stars. Nothing unusual. But on page 18, her breath stopped cold. The entire page was covered in the same symbol, now glowing faintly on her wrist. Dozens of identical shapes drawn in purple crayon, as if an 11-year-old Mia had been obsessed with them. Beneath them, in her messy childhood handwriting, were the words, "This means home." Home. She had no memories of anything before age 11. No parents, no town, no explanations. She had been found wandering the highway, confused and terrified. And now, somehow, the boy's sadness, his silent eyes, and the hunters chasing him were connected to the mysterious gap in her own past. Mia closed the sketchbook and pressed it against her chest, her heart thundering. A sudden tapping sound at her window made her scream. 3 soft taps, then 2 more. Tap, tap, tap. Rain ran down the glass in thin streams, and behind it, something small moved. She grabbed the baseball bat she kept near the door and crept toward the window, slowly, her whole body tense. When she pulled the curtain aside, her breath caught in her throat.
The boy was standing on her fire escape, completely soaked from the rain. His dark hoodie clung to his small frame. His impossibly dark eyes stared at her through the window with desperate intensity. He wasn't shivering. He wasn't crying. He just stood perfectly still, waiting. Mia fumbled with the lock and pushed the window open. "How did you get here?" she asked, her voice shaking. The boy didn't answer. He simply stepped inside, water dripping onto her floor, and held out something with both hands. A notebook. A child's notebook with drawings in it. He pressed it into her palms like it was evidence she needed to see. Fear made her fingers tremble as she opened it. Page after page showed drawings, stick figures, suns, moons, strange symbols. And then one page made her knees go weak. It was a drawing of her. Not adult Mia, child Mia, the same age she had been when she was found on the highway. Standing next to another child. A boy with dark hair, dark eyes, and no shadow. Written beneath the drawing in careful crayon letters were the words, "Don't forget me next time." Mia shook her head in disbelief. "No," she whispered, backing away. "This can't be real. I didn't know you. I've never met you." But another memory flickered in her mind. 2 children running through a stone courtyard, laughing as the sun shone overhead. Except the sun in that memory looked wrong, like it had cracks running through it. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. The boy finally spoke, his voice small and soft. "Because they'll come again. For me. For you." Before she could respond, a deep chill spread through the apartment. The lights flickered and shadows on the walls stretched unnaturally long, bending like living things. The boy grabbed her wrist right where the glowing mark was. "He's coming," the boy whispered. Mia stumbled backward, fear crawling up her spine. "Who? The hunters?" The boy shook his head slowly. "My father." A knock echoed through the apartment door. One single, heavy knock that didn't sound human, and the overhead lights blinked as though bowing to the presence outside. The boy looked at the door, then at her, and whispered, "Don't scream." And then the lock slowly began to turn on its own. The court that feared the human. The door opened before Mia had the chance to breathe, swinging inward with impossible grace, and the tall man from the diner stepped inside as if the hinges themselves bowed to him. He did not knock again, did not ask permission, did not move like someone entering another person's home. He moved like someone stepping into a domain that already belonged to him. The air thickened instantly, pressing against Mia's chest. Every light in the apartment dimmed to a soft flicker, bowing to the presence that walked through the doorway. He was taller than she remembered, his black coat flowing like ink spilled across the floor, and his silver eyes cut through the dim room with a cold, ancient intensity. Mia stumbled back, clutching the boy protectively against her side even though she knew she was weaker than anything in this room. The man's gaze slid to the child first. Not harsh, not angry. Something deeper, something that looked almost like relief. "You disobeyed me again," he said softly, his voice impossibly calm. But the boy didn't shrink or hide. Instead, he stepped forward and took Mia's hand, standing between them as if he was protecting her. The man's eyes flicked to where their hands intertwined, and a strange expression crossed his face. Recognition, shock, and something like longing before he hid it behind a cold mask. "You," he finally said to Mia, "should not remember him." Mia shook her head, her breath trembling. "I don't remember him, not fully. I don't understand what's happening." The boy looked up at his father, small but determined. "She needs to come. They are hunting again." The man let out a long, slow exhale before turning his eyes on Mia once more. "If they want him, they will come for you next. They can smell the bond. You were marked when you touched him." Mia instinctively looked at the symbol glowing faintly on her wrist. "What bond?" she whispered. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, and the entire apartment dissolved. Not slowly, not gently. It vanished in a whirl of darkness, wind rushing past her ears, her stomach dropping like she was falling through a tunnel, cold shadows twisting around her. She screamed and grabbed the boy tighter, but he held her calmly as if he'd experienced this many times before. The darkness broke suddenly, and Mia stumbled forward onto cold marble. She blinked hard, her breath catching in awe and fear. She wasn't in her apartment anymore. She stood inside a massive hall lit by floating flames that glowed blue instead of yellow. Tall pillars carved with ancient symbols rose to a ceiling so high it vanished into shadow. The walls shimmered with silver patterns that pulsed like a heartbeat. Dozens, no, hundreds of pale faces turned toward her. Some looked human, some did not. All had eyes too bright, too predatory, and every single one of them stared at Mia like prey. A low hiss rippled through the crowd. "A human. He brought a human here. She carries the mark. Look. Impossible. No mortal should bear that symbol." Mia stepped back instinctively, but the boy grabbed her hand, grounding her as the tall man moved forward. Unlike the others, he carried no fear of her, no disgust. Instead, he radiated a presence that made the entire hall lower their heads as he passed. He wasn't just someone important here. He was the one they obeyed. Their king. The Vampire King. When he reached the center of the hall, he turned sharply, his coat swirling like a shadow alive, and spoke in a voice that echoed off the marble. Silence! Every creature in the hall obeyed instantly, lowering their heads. Mia felt her pulse hammering as a tall woman with crimson eyes stepped forward, her beauty sharp enough to cut. "My king," she said coldly, "why have you brought a mortal into the heart of our court? She taints the air. Her blood is a stain." Mia flinched as several vampires snickered cruelly. "Look at her clothes. Is she a servant from the human world?" "No," another sneered. "Less than that. She smells like fear and poverty." Mia felt heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from humiliation so sharp it made her stomach twist. She was used to rude customers, cruel bosses, and people looking down on her, but never like this. Never by beings who were not even human. The Vampire King didn't turn around, didn't correct them, didn't protect her. He simply spoke, his voice dangerously calm. "She saved my son." The hall erupted into chaos, gasps, shouts, disbelief. The crimson-eyed woman's jaw tightened. A human girl saved the prince? Impossible. But Mia wasn't focused on their shock. She was focused on the boy's small hand tightening around hers. He stepped forward bravely, his voice small but firm. "She kept me safe. She helped me when no one else did." Mia's heart tightened. The vampires in the hall did not soften. Several hissed furiously. One shouted, "She is a threat!" Another snarled, "If she bears the ancient mark, she must be punished." And then another voice, a deep male voice dripping with hatred, bellowed, "She should not be alive!" Before Mia could react, a large vampire lunged toward her with supernatural speed. His fangs bared, his claws extended. She didn't have time to scream. But the boy did. "No!" His voice echoed like thunder. Power exploded from him in a burst of invisible force, slaving the attacking vampire backward, crashing him into a marble column hard enough to crack it. The entire hall went silent, shocked, horrified. The Vampire King finally turned, his eyes blazing silver, his expression deadly. "Touch her again, and I will tear apart anyone who dares disobey my command." The hall bowed instantly, trembling under his fury. Mia felt breathless, overwhelmed, shaking. Why was he protecting her now? Why didn't he stop them from insulting her earlier? The king stepped closer, his voice softer, but no less commanding. "From this moment forward," he announced to the court, "she is under my protection. Any harm toward her is harm toward me." Murmurs rippled through the hall like frightened shadows. The crimson-eyed woman glared at Mia with burning hatred, but bowed anyway. The king ignored them all and lowered his gaze to Mia, truly looking at her for the first time. Not with anger, not with coldness, with something she didn't understand. Something heavy, something old. "This is only the beginning of what you've forgotten." The night they came for the prince. Mia didn't have time to process the king's warning or the court's hateful stares. The moment she tried to steady her breathing, the massive palace trembled violently beneath her feet, the marble floor shaking like something enormous had slammed into the outer walls. Dozens of vampires snapped their heads toward the grand entrance, their eyes narrowing, their bodies going tense as an alarm. Deep, ringing, ancient, echoed through the corridors. The king's expression shifted from cold authority to a fierce, dangerous fury. "They've breached the lower gates," someone shouted. "Hunters!" another hissed. A wave of panic rippled through the hall, and for the first time Mia saw fear in the eyes of the creatures who had mocked her minutes earlier. The boy pressed closer to her, his small body trembling not from cold but from something deeper. Recognition. Dread. "They're here for him," he whispered, and Mia felt her heart lurch. She didn't know how she knew it, but she suddenly felt it too. Every breath of wind, every tremor, every shadow outside the palace walls was aimed at the little boy standing behind her. Before the king could issue a command, the grand doors exploded inward, shards of ancient wood flying like deadly knives. Hooded figures stormed inside, more than Mia could count, moving with inhuman speed, their eyes glowing that same terrible ember red she had seen outside the diner. Hunters. The same kind who had pressed their hand against the glass while the boy cried. The same kind who wanted him dead. Chaos erupted instantly. Guards rushed forward, forming a wall of bodies between the king and the intruders. Fangs flashed, weapons clashed, sparks flew across the marble, and the entire hall became a battlefield drenched in shadows and blue fire. Mia froze only for a second before instinct took over. She grabbed the boy and pulled him behind her, crouching low as a bolt of crackling red energy shot across the room and shattered a pillar where his head had been seconds before. The boy cried out softly, not from pain, but from fear that someone else might be hurt because of him. A hunter spotted them in the corner and shouted something in a language Mia didn't know, but she understood the meaning. "Kill the prince." The vampire king reacted instantly. He turned so sharply the air rippled around him. With a single gesture, he summoned a shield of swirling shadow between Mia and the incoming hunter. But two more hunters flanked from the side, bypassing the king's protection, streaking toward the boy with blades glowing red-hot. Mia didn't think, didn't plan, didn't fear. She moved. She pushed the boy to the floor and fell over him, using her body as a shield just as the hunters lunged. One blade grazed her shoulder, slicing through fabric and skin, burning like fire. She gasped in pain but didn't move, didn't back away, didn't let them take him. "Stay down," she whispered desperately. The hunters raised their weapons again, this time aiming to kill. Mia squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for impact. But it never came. Instead, a deafening roar shook the hall. The king stood behind them now, transformed entirely, the air around him rippling with raw power. His eyes blazed silver bright, brighter than the moon, and his fangs were fully bared. Shadows rose around him like living serpents, swirling with rage. He lifted one hand and, in a single motion, slammed the hunters backward with such force they crashed against the far wall and crumpled into unconscious heaps. The entire hall froze. Every vampire, every hunter, every creature in the room stopped mid-motion as the king stepped forward slowly, his expression a storm of fury and shock. His gaze fell on Mia first, bleeding, shaking, shielding his son with her own body. No one had ever done that before. No guard, no advisor, no vampire, no one. His voice when he spoke was not loud, but it cracked through the hall like thunder. "She bled for him." The palace fell into complete silence. The crimson-eyed woman who had insulted Mia earlier stared with wide eyes. Even she had no venom left in her. The king knelt beside the boy and touched his cheek gently, but his gaze flicked to Mia again, full of something new. Something she couldn't name. "You dared," he whispered to her, but it wasn't anger. It was disbelief, reverence, grief. "You dared to protect a prince with nothing but your mortal body?" Mia winced as the wound in her shoulder began bleeding faster. She tried to sit up, but her vision went blurry. "I couldn't let them hurt him," she murmured. "He's just a kid." The boy clung to her arm, his tears silent but constant. "She saved me," he whispered to his father. "Again." The king closed his eyes briefly, like the weight of those words was too much even for him. When he opened them, they glowed softer, still sharp, still ancient, but softened by something painfully human. A hunter suddenly rose from behind a broken pillar and hurled a dagger toward Mia and the boy. Without hesitating, Mia twisted to shield him once more, but this time she didn't need to. The king moved faster than her eyes could follow. Shadows erupted from his body, forming a vortex of dark wind that swallowed the dagger midair. The weapon dissolved into dust. The king's voice rose in a roar that shook the palace. "Enough!" The remaining hunters stopped fighting instantly, sensing death creeping toward them. The king stepped forward, lifting his hand. Time seemed to pause. Then the hunters were dragged backward by invisible force, pulled toward the shattered doorway, thrown outside the palace toward the raging storm beyond. Doors slammed shut behind them with the force of an earthquake. Silence fell again. The fight was over. Slowly the king turned back toward Mia. She expected anger. She expected scolding. She expected cold judgment. But instead, he stepped closer with something like awe in his eyes. "You are not what you appear," he said quietly. "No mortal defends a prince with such instinct. No human carries the ancient mark by accident. And no one stands between death and my son unless fate itself commands it." Mia tried to respond, but her strength finally gave out. She collapsed forward, and the boy screamed her name as she fell. The king caught her before she hit the marble, lifting her easily in his arms. "She saved you today," he whispered to his son. "And now I must save her." The hall watched in stunned silence as the vampire king carried the wounded human girl toward the heart of the palace, where no mortal had ever been allowed to go. The girl who changed the king. Mia drifted in and out of consciousness as the vampire king carried her deeper into the palace, the boy clutching her hand while running beside his father. She felt the cold marble passing beneath them, heard distant whispers of frightened courtiers, and sensed the heavy magic in the air as doors opened on their own before the king. Her shoulder throbbed with pain, warm blood soaking into her uniform, but the king's arms were steady, unshaking, as if a wounded human weighed nothing to him. He brought her into a high chamber lit by soft blue flames hovering above the walls, bathing everything in ethereal light. A large stone table stood at the center, carved with ancient symbols. He laid her gently upon it, his movements careful, almost reverent. Mia tried to sit up, but the pain made her gasp. The boy squeezed her hand tighter, his voice trembling. "Don't move. Father will help." The king turned toward a tall cabinet made of dark wood and opened it with a wave of his hand. Strange bottles, herbs, and shimmering powders floated out, arranging themselves beside Mia. "I should have stopped the hunters sooner," he said quietly, not looking at her. "I should have sensed their approach." Mia blinked in confusion. She had heard coldness in his voice before, anger, command, but never regret. He stepped beside her, placing one palm lightly over her wound. She winced, expecting pain, but instead a warmth spread through her shoulder, soothing and bright. Silver light seeped from his hand into her skin, stitching torn flesh, soothing burning nerves, pulling the darkness out. Mia exhaled shakily as the wound closed completely, leaving behind only faint warmth. How did you do that?" she whispered. "It was your own strength that kept you alive," he said softly. "I only guided the healing." Slowly she sat up, with the boy's help, her breath steady for the first time since the attack. The king regarded her silently for a long moment, his silver eyes softer than she'd ever seen. "You protected my son," he said again, as if repeating it made it more real. "You risked your life for him." Mia felt her cheeks heat. "Anyone would have," she murmured. "No," the king replied instantly, his voice deep and certain. No vampire would risk themselves for a child not of their blood, no hunter, not even many humans. The boy leaned against Mia, resting his head on her shoulder. His small voice broke the heavy silence. "Father, she remembered me, even when she wasn't supposed to." The king's gaze sharpened. "Tell me," he said softly. "What exactly do you remember?" Nia swallowed. This was the part she didn't understand herself. "I don't remember him," she said slowly. "Not fully. But I remember a symbol." She lifted her wrist, showing him the pale, glowing mark. "And I remember a boy, a garden, laughter." Her voice faltered. The king took a step closer. "A garden with stone walls?" "Yes," Mia whispered, "and a sun that looked broken." Something like sorrow flickered across the king's expression, a sorrow so old and heavy it made Mia's heart twist. "You were not found by accident all those years ago," he said. "You did not come to the human world by mistake." Mia stared at him, confused and afraid. "Then how?" The boy slid his fingers through hers. "You lived here once," he whispered, "before they took you." Mia felt like the room tilted. "I lived here? In a vampire palace?" The king nodded slowly. "Not as a prisoner, not as a servant. You were brought here under the ancient protection of the royal family. You were meant to be raised with my son, to be his companion, his balance." The boy blushed slightly, gripping her hand tighter. "You were my only friend." Memories flickered again, 2 children running, a boy without a shadow, her own young voice promising, "I won't forget you." Mia pressed a hand to her forehead. "Then why don't I remember?" The king's jaw tightened. "Because someone stole those memories from you. Someone who feared your bond with him." Mia felt cold all over. "Who?" The king exhaled deeply. "A faction within my own court. Those who believe humans are beneath us, those who feared a prophecy that spoke of a human girl who would change the fate of our world." Mia shook her head. "I'm just a waitress." "You are far more," the king replied. "The mark you bear is ancient, older than my throne. Only one human in each era is chosen by fate itself to protect the future prince. Only one human who can stand between darkness and the next heir." Mia stared at him. "So you're saying I'm supposed to protect him?" The king's voice softened. "You already did." Before Mia could respond, the chamber doors burst open. Vampires from the court, bruised from battle, knelt trembling before their king. "The hunters have fled, your majesty. They were not expecting her." Every pair of eyes in the room turned toward Mia with disbelief and fear. The human girl they had mocked, insulted, humiliated. The king stepped forward, his coat flowing behind him like living shadow, and when he spoke, every candle flickered. "Hear me," he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder. "Tonight, this human risked her life to protect the prince when our own guards failed." Shame rippled through the room. Tonight, she bled so he would not bleed. Gasps filled the hall. The king's voice grew sharper. Tonight she proved that courage is not born from bloodline or immortality. His gaze swept across every proud vampire, every cruel whisperer. From this moment onward, Mia is under the highest royal protection. Any vampire who insults her, threatens her, or doubts her worth will answer to me. The chamber trembled at the force of his words. The same vampires who mocked her earlier now bowed, some trembling, some stunned. Mia swallowed hard, overwhelmed. She wasn't used to being defended. In her world, no one ever stood up for her. But here, the most feared being in existence was declaring her worth to an entire empire. The king turned slowly back toward her. The intensity in his eyes had changed, still sharp, still ancient, but now warm, tethered, burning with something dangerous and beautiful. "You are no longer just a waitress in a forgotten diner," he said quietly. "You are the protector of my son." The boy leaned closer to her, his voice trembling with hope. "And maybe one day, something more?" Mia felt her heartbeat quicken. Not fear, not confusion, something else. Something that felt like the destiny she had been running from her whole life had finally caught up with her. The king offered his hand, not as a ruler, not as a monster, but as someone seeing her clearly for the first time. "Stay," he said softly. "Stay in this world. Stay with us." Mia looked at the boy, then at the king, and then at the glowing mark on her wrist. Her voice trembled as she spoke the words that would change everything. "I'm not going anywhere,"